Hi, this is Dan Korver, pastor here at Dalton Hill Baptist Church. We're a small Baptist church located in Owasso, Oklahoma. We're small enough to know you, but we're big enough to serve you and for you to serve as well. Our vision is to rescue, restore, and return to service. Rescue a non-believer or a believer who has been hurt or is lost, restoring them to Christ in fellowship with other believers with the desire that they in turn will help others along their way.
That should be our prayer, should it not? It's a beautiful song. And even the same deal we were talking about even earlier, Wednesday night, and even again this morning, 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name. What does it say? He's in our midst, so is he here today? So we're thinking about that when we go through it. We've been going through the miracles of Jesus. I was going to do a couple of them today. We have a short business meeting after, so we'll probably decide to change it to just one, the miracles. And we'll have a break, so that way if people, if there's some that want to leave, whatever they can. But today I'd like to talk about a miracle that's in 3 of the Gospels. But 30 years ago I was working for my older brother Bruce. You all have met him a few times. Working at his house, and he sat down. I was talking to him for a minute, and he had this big old bruise, long bruise across his leg. So I started asking him, well, what in the world did you do that? And he was real sheepish. He didn't want to say anything. Finally, he said, well, my nephew had done something wrong. I don't know what it was. He didn't tell me. I didn't ask. He said, I was trying to teach him about substitution, Christ substituting, paying the penalty, and about grace and about mercy. So I spanked myself and took the punishment instead of him. Well, he definitely punished himself because it was a pretty good bruise. But it made me stop and think today we're going to look for a person. I look at a couple of people who asked for mercy and received mercy. So I'd like to, if you want a title, Requesting and Receiving Mercy. Any of us ever requested or received mercy? Stop and just think about it, just for the sake of time. We've done it many times. But in Hebrews 4, if you remember in verse 15 and 16, it says we have a high priest who understands our weaknesses, right? How many of you are glad that you have somebody who has gone through life and knows what you're going through? And then in verse 16, it says to draw near with what? Confidence. So we have access to it. You have and I have access to the throne of God. But we go to receive what? Grace and mercy. Think about it. How would you define grace and mercy? You think about it. Mercy, I was just curious. I looked it up. This is a quote. Conveys a sense of deep feeling, pity, and active commitment to help those in distress. Today you're going to find people, and quite often, Son of David, have mercy on me. Mercy. We've often talked about mercy would be not getting what we deserve. What the wages of sin is what? What we deserve is spiritual death. Then you have grace, unmerited, unearned, undeserved favor, kindness freely given by God. I don't get what I deserve, hell. By His grace and death on the cross, I get heaven. Totally unmerited. Nothing I can do. So let's look then, when you think about it, but we have some attitudes also when we go to prayer. And James 4, remember in verse 6, it says, God resists who? Proud, and gives grace to humble. Okay, so it's important our attitude when we come. You also have, if you remember in Luke 11, there's only one time in all the Gospels did the disciples ever ask Jesus to teach them something. That's amazing. How many of us are asking, what would we be? We're asking all kinds of. They only asked him to teach us to pray. Obviously, they saw how important prayer was. And so we have the model prayer. But then when you get to verse 5 to verse 12, you remember in Luke 11, he says, be like the one who basically has someone come to his home and he needs food, so he goes to his neighbor who's already gone to bed and starts knocking on the door, and the neighbor says, go home, right? But because he keeps knocking, what does the neighbor do? He gets up and gives it to him. So we need to be consistent, persistently asking. You ever wondered, why do I persistently ask? He knows my need, doesn't he? But it also shows my dependence on him by continually asking. If you gave your kids every time they, or grandkids every time they asked for something, you wouldn't have a house big enough to hold it all. Because how many times do their need, their want? They have one thing today, and then tomorrow they want something else. But if you go later in that Luke 11, you'll also find he said that he won't. If he asks for a fish, he won't give you a snake. God gives us what's best for us. How many times do we ask for things that are not best for us? We're similar to the song that's sung. Thank God for unanswered prayers. So often you're thankful. You also go a little bit further. Then remember in James 1, you remember it says to consider all joy because of what it produces. But when you get to verse 5, it says, if any man lacks wisdom, do what? Ask of God. But you have to ask believing, otherwise you will receive nothing. You're unstable. So I think what happens too then, we have to ask in faith and really believe. How many of you are pray and then all of a sudden you're totally astonished when God answers your prayer? Has that ever happened to any of you? Any of you? Okay, I want you to think about it then. When I go to God in prayer, how would I evaluate my own personal prayer life? Go back over the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. How would you examine your personal prayer life? How would you do it? So today I would like for us, this is in 3 different accounts, and it's in Matthew 20, it's in Mark 10, and it's in Luke 18. It's the blind men who come to Jesus. And let me just tell you, there's possible, and you'll have people that jump on this immediately and say, oh, there's an error in the Bible. So let me just tell you the possible apparent difficulties, and let's see if we can answer them. In Mark 10:46, it says they were coming out of Jericho, and blind Bartimaeus comes to him. They're coming out of Jericho. Matthew 21:29, it says they're coming out of Jericho, and there's 2 blind men. You go to Luke 18, and it says as they were approaching Jericho, there was 1 blind man. Okay, so are they going into Jericho, or are they coming out of Jericho? Is there 1 blind man, or is there 2 blind men? So there's different ways of answering it. I'll give you what I believe is correct. One can be there's 2 different accounts or 2 different events. I don't think that's what it is, but it could be. Part of that's because like in Luke 18, if you remember, Luke 19, that's when Jesus, when he goes into Jericho, he stays there for a while, and that's when he meets Zacchaeus and speaks to Zacchaeus. Another possibility, they started... Okay, everybody awake? They start begging going into the city, and they keep begging until they come out of the city. But the hard part for that, too, you think about it, they're blind. And you have a large crowd, and that's, it's going to be a lot more difficult. And they're also, if you remember, a week from now, Jesus is going to be crucified. They're going a huge number of people. But that is a possibility going into Jericho, and they're begging them all the way through, and they get healed when they go out. The one I believe is actually correct. I'll give you a couple of reasons. It's just one account. You have 2 men, and Bartimaeus is the more prominent one. And also, I think Bartimaeus becomes a follower of Christ, and he would have been known. And so he would have been known afterward. What do you also have? You may not realize that you had the ancient Jericho of the Old Testament, which obviously, the walls come tumbling down. We sing that. But Herod the Great built a new Jericho 1 mile south of the old site. And that was the city. So you're in between the 2 cities, in between ancient Jericho and before you enter the new Jericho. So notice then, are they right? Yes, both are right. What you also have, I think it's important, is just one account, one speaking more prominently than the other, and it's recorded, but they have it. But if you do it, I want you to think about this. It's also perfect placement where this miracle occurs in Scripture. It's the last miracle that's recorded in Mark, but in Mark 10 and then also in Matthew 20 when it's recorded, just before this takes place, that's when you remember the sons of Zebedee. Mother comes up to him and says, I want my sons to do what? to sit on your right and your left, and I want them being prominent. And what did the other 10 do? They got mad for what reason? They hadn't thought about asking it too, right? Okay, so they're upset. Who's going to be? Remember, obviously Jesus said, "Are you willing to take this cup?" And he said, "Yes," and they do experience a cup of suffering because of it. But notice it's interesting then, after you have that in Mark and in Matthew, just before this miracle, Jesus gives the theme of Mark. Look over, if you would, just for a moment. Look over in Mark chapter 10 and notice what it says. Mark chapter 10. Remember, he says basically whoever wants to be greatest must to be him who serves. But notice what he says in 45. Key verse for the book of Mark. For even the Son of Man did not come to serve, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. All right, so he just got through telling you what's going on. Notice right after he does that, he's now going to show he is a servant. And he is going to help others. Same placements you have in the book of Matthew. Exact same thing, order. And then in Luke, you have it in Luke 19 and verse 10. I want you to think about this dilemma. If you would, turn over to, we'll be kind of going back and forth between Luke and Mark, but go over to the same story in Luke 18. Because I want you to think about this. You're blind. Apparently you weren't blind all your life, but you're now blind. So how do you make a living? Begging. Okay, and where would you beg? Okay, on a busy road. So you're sitting outside of Jericho, and you'll notice then, obviously, Jericho being a prominent city, but if you notice, I think it's interesting, look in verse 35. And it came about that as he was approaching Jericho, this is Jesus, a certain blind man, which we're told on the other account, this is Bartimaeus, was sitting by the road begging. Now, hearing a multitude coming by, he began to inquire what this might be. Now, if you are a beggar, and the only way you get income is by begging, and you have a large crowd coming, what dilemma do you have? All right, boy, this is my time to really clean up. They tell him it's Jesus of Nazareth. Okay? Do you want to get a lot of financial means with all these people coming by? Or are you going to start crying out, wanting your eyesight? You get your eyesight, what happens to your income? You're not getting any more. Think about that. You sit there and beg and you're well known, people know you. And people are coming by. Do I want my income? Or do I want to have mercy and get my eyesight? And interesting. It's why Jesus sometimes asked them on different other occasions, what do you want from me? Do you really want to be well? Because there's some that do not. So I think it's interesting when you look at it. So if you go back to Mark then, we'll stay there for a while, in Mark chapter 10, which it could be in Luke as well, but let's just look in Mark. You'll notice what he starts then in verse, you had it in 45, and now we're going on. He's coming into the city. You notice in 47, when he heard that it was Jesus, talking about a blind Bartimaeus, when he heard that it was Jesus the Nazarene, he began to cry out, saying, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Notice it's continual. It's present tense. He also says, Son of David. He's blind, but does he recognize who Jesus is? Yes. You're the promised Messiah. Isaiah says you're going to restore what? The sight to the blind, heal the lame, and so on. That's who you are, and I believe it, and I'm asking for it. I want mercy. Notice he doesn't demand it. I'm asking for mercy, not that I deserve it. Now, what do you think about it? 48. Many were sternly telling him to be quiet. You ever wonder who those people were? Think about it. Have you ever been told to be quiet? You ever told when you're praising the Lord, be quiet? You ever told when you do different things, be quiet? It's amazing how many times we try to censor people when we should be getting behind the people. Okay, and obviously they're trying to tell him to be quiet, and the more they tell him to be quiet, the more he what? The louder he gets, cries out even more. He wants to make sure that Jesus hears him. You are the promised Messiah. I want mercy. I want my eyesight. I want it restored. He's not looking for any alms today or any giving given to him today. I want eyesight, not income. And I think it's interesting when you look at that, he wants to regain. Now when you think about it, a question you can ask yourself, just when this pleading for mercy, who is Jesus to you? Do you see Jesus as the promised Messiah? Do you see him just as somebody you go to get something? I mean, so often people come to him just to get something. And as soon as they got it, just like we saw last week, the lepers, and they come and they get what they wanted, and what happens? 9 of them are gone, never come back. Think about it though. Another one, what have you been asking for? What have you been asking God for? And by the way, what was your attitude? He's asking for what? Mercy. And a lot of times we're asking for what? I've been good. I've done all these things for you, and you owe it to me. He doesn't ask for any of that. He asks for mercy. And that's what we're told earlier. What you go to him, receive grace and mercy. He resists the proud. If you remember, we saw a miracle earlier when the leadership said that this man has done so much for our nation, he deserves to be healed. But the man said, I do not deserve it. So it's important on our attitude. Once you think about it, though, he goes on then, that was the request, starting in verse 48. It's interesting. And many were telling him to be quiet. He kept saying, Son of mercy, have mercy on me. And notice then what happens is there's 2 requests that Jesus gives. 49. Jesus stopped and said, call him here. All right? Think about it. And they said, called the blind man, saying, take courage, rise. He's calling for you. You think about it, that big crowd and everything else, and how you go towards Jesus, but you're blind. You think about it. Usually a blind person is going to be able to do things because when it's quiet. A lot of noise is much, much more difficult. So you got what you asked for. Take courage. That would be important too. Because how many of you, when you're walking up, that'd be something else. Jesus says to come. Which he tells us to. Notice it says, casting aside his cloak, he jumped up and came to Jesus. No hesitation. He comes straight to him. Notice what the second thing Jesus is asking. One is, tells him to come here. What do you want from me? Don't you think Jesus knows what he wants? Why is he saying it? He wants him to verbalize his faith. He's also saying it to the nation. This man is blind, but he sees who I am. You all see me, but you're blind to who I am. I think it's important. And notice what he says to him, Rabboni, which obviously my Lord or my Master, I want to regain my sight. So notice he had sight. We don't know what caused him to lose it. We don't know how old he is or anything else. But he wants to regain his sight. And I think it's important when we go to him, was he specific in what he wanted? I think we need to be the same way. I often hear people say, Lord, bless the missionaries and all those that serve you around the world. Okay? Don't you think we ought to be a little more specific? And don't you think we ought to name some of them that need our help? And so on. And so I think he was very, very specific of what he wanted, and so on. Notice what happens then. Jesus said, go your way, your faith has made you well. Okay, you're blind, and he says, go. He turns to go, and what happens? He can see. I want you to think about what happens here, because notice it said, immediately he regained his sight, and notice, and he began what? Following on the road. Following is imperfect tense, which means he started to follow, and he is still following now. Jesus did a miracle. He recognized him as the Messiah. He became a follower. Not only was he healed physically, he's healed spiritually, he becomes a follower. And I think it's important for all of us, when we stop and think about it. We go to Jesus all the time in prayer, we get something from him, and then what happens? We wait till the next crisis. And then we go and we ask again. So when you think about it, so here you have it. He asked for mercy, and he received mercy. And most of us have done the same thing. So again, like I said, what are you asking for? And when it's granted, how do you respond? I think it's important we get it, and we forget a lot about it and move on to the next one. I want you to think about then, if you would, turn over to Luke chapter 7 for a moment. So here we've had the pondering the teachings of Jesus. You need to come to him and to ask for grace, come to ask for mercy. You want to ask consistently. You want to ask in faith. You want to be believing specific. We also saw the perfect placement that you have here. Notice also, I think it's interesting, the dilemma. He cared more about his actual eyesight. Anybody hear that ringing? Or is it just in me? I can hear it in my ear. Then he asked for mercy. But look over in Luke chapter 7. I think it's really an interesting on Jesus' teaching that you have here. And notice starting in verse 36, a problem that we have. And think about this, and who best fits you in the story. In verse 36 it says, now one of the Pharisees was requesting, we know his name is Simon, we'll get it later, was requesting him to dine with him. He entered the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And behold, there was a woman in the city who was a sinner. And when she learned that he, Jesus, reclining at the table of the Pharisee's house, she brought alabaster vial of perfume. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and kept wiping them with the hair of her head, kissing his feet, anointing them with perfume. That'd be quite a sight, would it not? Notice what the Pharisee who had invited him saw this. He said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know what sort of person this woman is who's touching him, and she's a sinner. Not any judgmental attitude at all, is it? Jesus answered and said to him, Simon, I have a thing to say to you. And he responded, say it, teacher. I want you to think about this. So here you had the problem. This lady is touching him and anointing him, and she is obviously well known in the city and is not a woman of good repute. And notice what's happening. But obviously she's had a change of heart. I want you to think about this. Okay, we'll personalize this for a moment. Okay, so you have to use your imagination. I'm a wealthy man. Use your imagination. Okay, and these two men in the story, one's Grady and one's Glenn. All right, a certain moneylender, Dan, had two debtors. One owed him 500 denarii, Glenn, and the other 50. How much is a denarii? 1 day's wage. Okay, so let's think for a moment. Okay, let's just say $200. $200, 5 times, 5 working days, that'd be $1,000 a week. $52,000 in a year. Okay, so then notice they were unable to pay. He graciously forgave them. Which of them would love him more? Okay, so if Grady owes me 50 times 200, or 50 times 200 is how much? No? Huh? 50 times 200. Okay, I'll let you work on that one. And the other one is 50 times 200. $1,000 and $100,000. If Glenn owes me $100,000 and I forgive him, how thankful would he be versus somebody who you forgave of a $1,000 debt? Okay, now he's going to person. But again, think about it. What did Paul say? I'm chief among what? Sinners. Do we really see ourselves as the sinner that we really are? And if we do, how thankful should we be to Jesus? And if we really are that thankful for his grace and his mercy, should we not be showing it? Anything that he asked from it. You think about it, 100,000. You think about it, that would be $100,000 if you had 500 days wage. That would be approximately how many years of work? 2 years work, and that's if you gave every single penny you earned, which is impossible. So you think about how long and how that would be. That would be more than an entire lifetime basically worth of income, of work to try to do, that he forgave. So notice then when he then turns to Simon, Simon says, I suppose the one he forgave more, and he said to him, this is 43, you have judged correctly. Turning to the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house, you gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but she, since the time I came in, not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she's anointed my feet with perfume. For this reason I say to you, her sins, which are many, has been forgiven, for she loved much. He who is forgiven little loves little. And he said to her, your sins have been forgiven. And those who were reclining at the table with him began to say to him, who is this man who can even forgive sins? Obviously the Pharisees there. And notice he says, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Does she recognize who Jesus is? Yes. And he forgives her of her sin. And notice she demonstrates her love and gratitude for his grace and mercy. Did Simon demonstrate anything? No. And so it's interesting, how many ways has God shown you mercy? You ever stopped and started adding that kind of stuff up? Grace, and how have we responded? And all the different things. We've all been narrowly missing accidents or doing whatever, and you ever think that maybe God had a hand in what caused those things to take place? Is my thanks only that of lip service? She not only said it, but she showed it. How am I showing my thankfulness for receiving grace and mercy? Ask for it, receive it. You notice she showed it in what she had, her tears and the perfume that she had. He showed it by what he said, talking about, and then also by following. So how are we showing it? I think it's interesting. How would I describe my prayer life? I go to receive grace and mercy, and when I get it, what do I do? And I think it's interesting what we have. So again, how of you have received some mercy? All right. Anybody want to tell me how you did?
I have my left leg.
Pardon? You have your left leg that could very easily have lost. Very much so. Who else?
Forgiveness of sin.
Pardon?
Forgiveness of sin.
Forgiveness of sin. You bet. You bet. Brian's thankful it wasn't a 2-ton truck, aren't you, Brian? Who else? Anybody? Yes.
God healed both my sons.
Healed both the sons. Yes, we got one of them with us today. Okay. Who else?
Brought me to a loving church.
Okay. Yes.
God's been with me through all of this surgery, and I've been very calm. I don't know if everybody around me was calm, but I have been very calm through it all, and I've been very blessed with very little pain and quick healing. And
Great. Who else? Obviously, we had the one that I mentioned, the Melissa, and she's engaged. Remember, I said to Aaron, and don't know if they're believers. They'd gone down to NB Anderson, having cancer and so on. They found out that it's a non-aggressive cancer, one that can be treated with it causing tumors on her lungs, but can be treated with medication. And so, I mean, you can't have a much better diagnosis than that. So tomorrow we have friends of ours that are going. We've been praying for them. Carol, she's going to MD Anderson for lung cancer treatment stuff starting tomorrow. Breast cancer, right, excuse me. And so anyway, she's the one that fell and broke her arm also, and then the surgeon was doing back surgery, nicked her bladder, so they've had to go to Detroit. So they've been through a lot the last couple of years. So anyway, but again, just thankful for his mercy of what it had so far.
We'd love for you to come and visit with us and fellowship with us. We're located at 8263 North Owasso Expressway, which is on the east side of Highway 169 North, between 76th and 86th Street North. We have coffee and fellowship from 8:30 to 9 Sundays, followed by Sunday school for all ages from 9 to 9:45, and our Sunday morning worship service is from 10 to 11. We likewise have a Wednesday night service for all ages from 7 to 8. Now may the Lord of peace himself give you peace at all times, and in every way the Lord be with you all the time.